looks like the chat is up and running. So feel free to drop questions in there throughout. There's also the Q&A function, which should be reachable as well. So if you have direct questions, Q&A, chat, feel free to engage with everyone. We want this to be a very involved process today. And so yeah, we'll give another 60 seconds here and then we'll get going. Good to see people in the chat. Adrian, hope all is well. Good to see you. James from across the pond, I believe. Good to see you. Indeed. Yeah, everyone, if you want to shout out where you're from, I'm based in this little town called New York in Manhattan, the Upper East Side near Central Park. But where are you guys from? I know most of you, if not all of you, and I know we span a lot of different places in the country, but also in the world. Connecticut, Colorado, India, Arizona. Also, there was supposed to be a poll that came up probably when you joined. If you have a chance to answer that, that'd be great. If you didn't see it, let me know. It's a little finicky. And so the poll will help us guide kind of the rest of the 2 days here in PromptLab. Okay, seeing some people haven't seen it. Okay. Okay, good to know. All right. Well, I'll relaunch it when you have a second. Really, we want to learn what you want to learn about, whether that is learning how you can take prompt engineering and bring it to your organization internally, whether you're looking to figure out how to get better outputs for your AI applications in production, whether you're trying to figure out how you can get your team up to speed, anything that can give us some more information as how we can help you will be great. But I think it's a good time to get going. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We want this to be really interactive today. And so I think most of you probably have accounts set up already with us, but I will drop an access code and a link to sign up. I'd recommend creating an account because we will be doing a lot of interactive stuff today. And it's always helpful to, get your hands dirty with this stuff. So there's an access code for everyone, and that should work. Great. All right. Well, I think we've given enough time. So like I said, it's going to be really interactive. And so I would definitely recommend creating an account if you haven't already. And without further ado, we can get started. Cool. So welcome to day one of PromptLab. This will be a 3-day live interactive experience where we'll be talking about everything related to prompt engineering. As a couple of housekeeping notes, recordings will be shared most likely in the same day. They'll be shared via Zoom recording, but we'll probably also upload them to YouTube to share as well. So if you miss a day, if you have to leave early, don't worry, we'll be sharing this. Feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on those as we're going through them, and I'll always try and leave some time at the end. And yeah, again, we'll be sharing some polls as well, so that is always helpful to hear directly from you. And we're scheduled for 45 minutes. If people want to hang around after a little bit for that remaining 15, we can do some extra Q&A then. So today we will be doing a quick intro into prompt engineering and tokenization, kind of just setting the base foundation really fast. And then I want to talk about some lesser discussed topics about prompt engineering, from parameters and system messages all the way to what type of model you should be using before we get into any actually kind of prompt writing. And then we'll do a little experiment at the end, live in PromptLab, and we'll have some time for Q&A as well. And so our goal with all of this is to help you get better outputs from prompts, and whether that's for some internal tool you're building, for an app you're using in production, whether you're just using ChatGPT, that is our goal here. And it's really what we believe prompt engineering is. It's engineering that input to get a better output at the end of the day. And whether that's across these different platforms in PromptHub, in ChatGPT, that is what we think of as prompt engineering. And I get this question a lot of like, why prompt engineering? Can't you just like write what you want? Isn't it just writing English to a chatbot? Why do we need to do all this engineering stuff, this extra fluff? It's not going to be useful. It's going to go away. I think anyone who has experience or tried to get a specific output from an LLM will know that you can't just write a single sentence and get what you want every time. There are a lot of intricacies. In the same way there's intricacies when you're talking to another human. The same words aren't going to work to get the output. It might require a couple of different ways. And so we've seen firsthand just how far prompt engineering can get people. And in general, when thinking about kind of like what we mentioned, getting better outputs, there's three general buckets that you can work on. Prompt engineering, doing some sort of RAG of retrieval augmented generation, or fine-tuning models. And what we love about prompt engineering is that it really should be the starting point. Whether you're building an app internally into production, whatever it might be, we really think that prompt engineering should be the starting point. And this slide is essentially grabbed from OpenAI's demo day. It's recreated a little bit, but they feel the same way. You can get really far with prompt engineering if you're putting in some time. And that allows you to then also see where your kind of the misfalls are. Is it a short-term memory problem that you're running into? Is it a long-term memory problem that you're running into? This will then allow you to think and see of what you need to do next. Do you need to do RAG? Do you need to try a fine-tuned model? Are you running into costs and latency issues? Prompt engineering is a great place to start for all of this and can get you really far. And you literally can't avoid it in terms of getting an output from an LLM. You have to send a prompt. There's no other way, at least that I know of, to get an output from an LLM. And so at the end of the day, it will come down to that. Maybe it becomes less complex in the future, maybe not. But that's where we are right now. And in terms of the structure of how we're getting outputs, I don't see that changing too much going forward. And I think prompt engineering can really become a competitive advantage in the same way that having a really good software engineer is better than having a not so good software engineer. Having great prompt engineering is better than having lackluster prompt engineering. And with people are getting really smart in terms of what feels like AI generated content. And they're also getting smart in terms of keeping an eye out for hallucinations. And so having good prompt engineering could be the difference between you and your competitor, between you having a better experience in app versus your competitor. And so we think this is a huge area for companies to win, because we all have access to the same APIs. We all have access to the underlying models, but what you do with them, that user experience, is tightly bound with prompt engineering. And I think there's a lot of room for growth, and that teams that fully embrace this will end up being the winners in this kind of next era of software. And if I had to raise up my flag and say, hey, if you can only take one thing away from this 3-day course, would be the number one rule that I keep seeing come up over and over again is to give the model room to think. Don't overly constrain it. Prompt it to give its reasoning. When you allow the model to think through what it has to do, it will have better outputs. And this spans from code generation to creative writing to classification. Again and again, I keep seeing this pop up. And I really strongly believe that anywhere you can enable this type of thinking, you'll get better outputs. And so let's talk about tokens a little bit. And so for quick definition of token is just the basic unit of information that an LLM reads to understand and generate text. It can be an individual character, as we see, or two characters here with this apostrophe S. It can be half of a word, as we see with evergreen is split up. It is really dependent, and we won't go too much into the tokenization method that has been used, but just understand that this is what the model understands, and not so much words, but tokens is the language that models speak. And so when you write a prompt, it's broken down into tokens immediately. Again, this is because LLMs don't interpret language in the same way that we do. They interpret tokens. And it's this tokenization that they turn English into tokens. And this is also how they generate those outputs. And this is additionally why you see pricing is based in tokens. It's all coming back to this rudimentary base level of unit that is the token for a model. And we'll look at this in one more second in a little bit more detail when we start discussing parameters and looking at temperature specifically. So LLMs are probabilistic machines. They don't really think. They are just guessing the next most probable token. And so it can really seem like they're thinking or that they're very human-like, but at least at this point, they're just running probabilities. And this might change in the future, but generally this is how the setup works now. And so specifically relating to temperature, one of the parameters you can set in the models, temperature, a higher temperature means that you will get more creative, non-deterministic outputs, and a lower temperature means you'll get more deterministic outputs. And so looking at this example here, if the preceding token is sports and I have a high temperature, I might get this word passed to be as the next word because it's less probable that my temperature is higher. So the likelihood of that increases, and I'm more likely to get something that's a little bit more kind of wacky. And we'll see this in an experiment later. But if I have a low temperature, I'm probably going to get the most, the next best, the next most probable token. Top P and temperature kind of go hand in hand. They're very similar. Top P is also known as nucleus sampling. It's a little technical, and we honestly just tell most of our clients to just focus on temperature. But Top P works by selecting the smallest set of tokens whose cumulative value exceeds that P value. And so you can see when the top P is 1, it has access to all of those potential tokens. But if we start to restrain it, you can see we only have 2 options here that get us to that sum of 0.94. We lose out on these other token values here, such as worldwide and activities. They get completely cut off from the selection process overall. And so it's another way to kind of work on the non-deterministic and creativity aspect of the models. And one very important point is to use them independently. If you're going to change one, leave the other one. That's an OpenAI recommendation, and Anthropic is kind of backed the same. So if you're using top B, make sure temperature is set to 1 and vice versa. Frequency and presence penalty, again, not used too often, but when we see it used, frequency penalty really relates to specific text repetition. So if for some reason you need to cut down on repetitive text, you'd use frequency for that. But presence penalty is more kind of thematic. So if you don't want the model to output the same kind of concept over and over again, maybe you are generating ideas for blogs or strategies, that is when you would use something like a presence penalty to make sure that you're not getting a lot of repeat data. And so with that, we'll jump to our first kind of test here today. And come here. So I am in Prompt Hub here. I'm going to go into this group of prompts that I've made. Go to our temperature comparison. And what we're going to do is we're going to run a prompt many times with a bunch of varying temperatures. So I'm going to make this a batch run, and I'm going to tweak the parameter, the temperature parameter from low to high. Do 0.5 for that one. All right, and so the prompt here is just tell me a fact about skydiving. And we've said varying temperatures for each of the outputs here. So on the lowest end, skydiving is considered one of the safest extreme sports with an average of only points. Wow, that's much less fatalities than I would have thought. And then all the way on the other end, this is with a temperature of 2. We see it gets really wild. I mean, it's not even like readable. Some of these aren't even words. It gets really pretty crazy. So these are on the kind of 2 extremes of what you'll see. You need to be really careful when you're going up to the really high temperature levels. But we can even see as the temperature is at like 1.5 here. This is like a pretty interesting fact. I would say that models are more likely to hallucinate when you have a higher temperature. So this is something I would definitely want to check. But if it's true, I kind of like this fact a little bit more than just this like very straightforward fact. This is a little bit more creative. And so for my use case, that might work a little better. So that's why doing these kind of tests side by side are really helpful, just to see how the model's even interpreting this stuff and where the outputs land. All right, so we'll do a quick max tokens test as well. So I already ran this prompt, but so the prompt is return the first 10 sentences of the Declaration of Independence. On the left, I didn't have any, this is my previous output and prompt. I didn't have any max token set. And then on the right, I set a max tokens of, I think 345, it looks like here. In PromptLab, you always be able to see how many tokens were used in both the completion and the prompt up here, and you can have a long cover to see the breakdown itself. But so coming down on the left side, it returns, since there wasn't any max tokens constraint, it just returns the first 10 sentences of the Declaration of Independence. Ooh. On the right side, we can see it gets to number 5, and then it kind of cuts off in this sentence. It says, and to provide new guards for their, and then it just stops. This is really something important to keep in mind when you're using max tokens, is that the model just will cut off wherever it's done. And as we saw, tokens can be half of a word, they can be a single character. And so luckily this kind of ended at least on a full word, but it's really important to keep in mind that that might not always be the case. And again, if you need to work with a specific output length, I would really work on prompt engineering the output to be that length rather than using max tokens to kind of imply that restriction. I think max tokens could be like a secondary catch for that. But again, if you're going to constrain the model too much, it might end up backfiring on you. So it'd be something worth testing. All right, the system message. So as of last week or 2 weeks ago, Anthropic also added system message support. Before it was just OpenAI, but now both of the major providers do provide a system message. And coming in here, the system message is based on the system role. So if we look at this kind of exchange of messages, we have the first message, which is the system message that just kind of sets the scene and tells the assistant what it is. So you are a helpful assistant. Then the user asks some question, the LLM responds as the assistant, and then continue on forever and ever. And you're seeing this, if you've built a custom GPT, you'll see that you can set a lot of this stuff in the system message. And again, it's really helpful for kind of setting the role in the context. A couple of things: when you're just sending a prompt to OpenAI or Anthropic, system message is optional, it's not necessary. Should be used to set context and rules. It's where you would set the role. So pretend to be XYZ, pretend to be a copywriter. You can actually even use it if you're building a chatbot to help protect against prompt injections. And so very quickly, we'll do kind of a system message versus the prompt, what should go where, with a few examples. So as I said, setting the role, respond as X, pretend you're Y, providing context or instructions that are like more high level. So if you want the response to use layman terms or speak in a certain way, that's some good stuff to add into the system message. Again, guiding model behavior, avoiding certain things, again, more high level. Format and style, reply in bullet points. Again, this could probably be put into the prompt as well. But again, I kind of want to think a little bit higher level versus being specific about the JSON schema would be something you would have in the prompt versus kind of that you just wanted JSON to be in the system message. And then for the prompt, it's basically a lot of similar stuff, but just getting one more layer specific. So having the specific question, the specific contextual information, directing the immediate focus for that specific tasks, really just getting one more layer specific, I would say, in terms of both the details, the requirements, the outputs, what you want to avoid. That's where that information should live in the prompt. And so I mentioned the system message can help against prompt injections. And so if you're building a chatbot dynamically and you want to help protect your whatever the underlying system message or protect just general usage of it, one thing that we've seen work well for our clients is kind of appending a system message inside, kind of in the background of your chatbot experience. For a while, it was kind of rumored that OpenAI at least gave more onus to the system message. I don't know if this is true anymore, but that was kind of a prevailing thought for a while there, a couple of months ago. And so if we look at this example, we tell our assistant to not mention our competitors or Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, and we could see the user kind of gets around this by just asking some information that are leading questions to about Google. Coming down here, we inject a system message into the kind of chat flow, and that helps the model remember it almost, you could say, to then make sure it doesn't act out and it doesn't mention any of our competitors. All right, and so we'll do another quick test here. So we wrote a whole bunch of articles about almost all the content that we're talking about today, and so those will be shared. You can also just find them on our blog. But we did a lot of system message tests, and one thing we wanted to look at was just like, what is using the system message actually result in? What does that additional context provided actually do? And so I ran this test this morning. On the left, we could see we have a system message that says, you're a content marketing expert with 10 years of experience specializing in creating content for webinars. And then the prompt is, what are some key factors to consider when running your first webinar? The prompt stayed the same. The only difference between our previous version and our new version is that we removed the system message completely from the new version. And this is where kind of PromptLab is super helpful for this type of stuff, where you can do these kind of easy comparisons side by side. And you can take a quick second if you would like to read through some of this stuff. I'll give you a moment to do that here, and I'll take a peek at some of the Q&A going on. So I see a question from Const01. Does system message equal custom instructions in the chat GPT interface? Yeah, basically, is the short answer. That's a good way to pick up on that. What's probably happening there is that it's being sent as a system message at the beginning of every chat that you have. I see Josh asked, will it always truncate the response to achieve max tokens rather than constrained through summarization? Depends on the task. So if we were looking at that task we were looking at, it was related to the Declaration of Independence. And I'm asking for the first 10 sentences of that. So in that case, it's going to truncate because it's getting me what I asked for. In different situations, if you're asking for a summarization task, it probably will still just cut off too. It doesn't really have like an awareness of that. Like it's not aware of how many more tokens it has to go. And so it's also not aware of how many tokens it's generated because it's stateless and it's auto-regressive. And so you'll see most of the times it will just kind of truncate and cut off. This is something that I would recommend just testing out with a summarization prompt. But in general, I think you'll find it will be cut off and truncated more so than intelligently summarized. And then, Paulin, I saw you had a question of what temp do you recommend for a task like analyzing code? So we put together a kind of cheat sheet for this, where we put together a table. So coming down here for a couple of different use cases. And again, this is under our parameters article. But for code generation, not exactly code analysis. I know like your guys' use case pretty well, but I would say pretty low. You want this to be pretty non-deterministic. You're not really looking for creativity, at least when you're generating code. Analyzing, you might be like one more step up. So I would play around this area and maybe go up by, to 0.3 or 0.2. And then Aldo, are there any uses or fields where top P is preferable to temperature or worth experimenting with? There certainly are. It's helpful if you want to like restrain those number of potential tokens, as we kind of saw before, that list got a lot shorter. And so if you really want to just cut out the bottom certain amount, it's helpful then, versus temperature never cuts out stuff completely, but it will make it play around with the probabilities to make things that are normally less probable more probable. And so I could imagine some situations where you are like concerned with the sampling that the model can choose from. I can't think like practically of like one, and I don't think we've seen one yet. But it'd be something of that shape. But so coming in here, I'll come down. A couple things that stuck out to me, looking at these two, is looking at, let's say, this promote your webinar and how the two differ there. I think on the left we see, develop a marketing plan, go across email, social, blog posts, etc. Offer incentives or partner with influencers. And then on the right, again, we have mentions of different channels. Set up a registration process to gather information, send reminders. I think the one on the right is less detailed. We have this other part of offering incentives and thinking about influencers, which actually I think is a good way to grow your webinar. And so I would say that it's kind of a layer deeper that relates specifically to what marketing webinars. And this is just one example. There's a couple more sprinkled throughout here. So I would say that the left is more detailed, and that's the one that did have the system message, which shouldn't really come as a huge surprise. But this is a good example to show just how a little testing can really show you how the model will react, and then you can continue to kind of use this in practice later on. All right, so moving on from system message, we want to talk about models. We will be talking mostly just about the two major providers, Anthropic and OpenAI. I know there's tons of open source models out there. We won't really be touching on that as much. But when picking a model, comes down to kind of cost, speed, and performance are the three major things to keep in mind, I would say. And so when it comes to speed, we run a monthly newsletter that sends out latency benchmarks. Dalton, if you could grab that link and just drop it in the chat, or anybody who has it available. So every month we run a suite of experiments to get the average output token, milliseconds per output token. And so this is important. The models are constantly changing, so we're trying to update this constantly. And you might be wondering, why were we only looking at output tokens? And the reason for that is, no matter how many tokens that you send to the model, it has all that information all at once since you're packaging it up and sending it to it. And so it's able to kind of process all of those tokens in parallel versus when it's outputting tokens, it's generating them one by one, kind of how we saw before. And so the latency of a model is really directly related to the output token amount and not really affected too much by the input token amount since they can be processed in parallel. There is some additional latency, but not too much. And so speed is definitely something important to keep in mind. I would recommend joining our newsletter there so you can have the kind of the most up-to-date information as we continue to kind of move through the models here. In terms of performance, I found this really interesting. This was from Cotu's AI report that came out a couple of weeks ago. And basically what this says, so on the left, we have overall win rates from humans comparing Claude 1 and Claude 2. And we see generally, Claude 1 is more preferable by about 5%, but Claude 2, beats Claude 1 on every single one of like the typical benchmarks, whether it's the bar exam, coding, math, harmlessness, whatever that might mean. And so you can't even rely just on the benchmarks alone of saying this model is better than this one because it passed the bar exam or it did this or it did that, because it might not align with the human preference. And we're kind of seeing that with the new GPT-4 Turbo model where it's fast and it's supposed to be smarter, although they haven't really said information publicly. But a lot of people that I talk to say that the quality is actually not as good. And that I'm sure will change over time. But it's important to keep in mind that we aren't, you eventually have people using this stuff on the other end. It's important to get the feedback from them, see what they're liking, what they're using, and how that can reflect your choice of model. Additionally, cost. Luckily, these keep going down, which is great, but this is something important to keep in mind from the different providers here. We have Azure listed just because you can host the same models on Azure. And so it comes down to kind of these trade-offs between speed and cost and performance. And that's something that really can only come, I would say, with doing a lot of tests. So you have a little graph here kind of plotting speed versus cost. We'll share this out with everyone. There's no need to kind of go too deep on it now. But in general, some things that we always would tell people is that if you're using the OpenAI models and you can host them on Azure, do that because it's much faster. It'll be like at least 20% faster for each one of the OpenAI models and some additional benefits from like a security standpoint. For creative writing, I would definitely give Anthropic's models a try. We've done a lot of testing with creative writing and have found that Anthropic's model, anecdotally, or their prose quality is much higher. So again, this is something worth testing. Every situation is different. And then kind of coming back to the cost versus speed question, in a lot of cases, 3.5 Turbo actually will perform as well as 4 if you're just doing classification or some sort of listicle stuff. Like you might not need all the power of 4 and additional latency that comes with it. Instead, 3.5 might get you there. And it really comes down to doing a lot of tests, I would say, and being able to see how these things perform when you change the model, when you change these parameters, and just finding that where you want to be in terms of that speed, performance, and quality. And so we'll end today with a little kind of prompt challenge here that I think is really illustrative of why testing is important and can really get you pretty far. And yeah, as Dalton said, you can, another benefit of hosting on Azure is that you can use your fine-tuned models directly in PromptHub if they're hosted there. I see a message from Cliff too before we get into the experiment. When you use ChatGPT via script in Google Sheets, is it using GPT-4 or 3.5? My guess is probably 3.5. It depends on if you're using is this like a third-party tool or like a plugin? Because if that is the case, it might be set by the creator of that plugin. Um, yeah, you can let me know, Cliff, if you want to write in the chat here. I can try and answer that more directly. For the most case, it's probably 3.5. But again, there are some factors in terms of if it's a third-party thing, if you guys built it yourself, who sets it kind of behind the scenes. Let's see. All right. Okay, so you say it's self-built, so it's maybe in your OpenAI account settings. So yeah, if it's self-built, there's a couple of ways you could like figure that out then. One is that not every organization even has access to GPT-4. My guess is that you guys probably do at this point. But in that case, it's whoever on your team built it probably set a default model for using it in Sheets. And so I'd ask them. My guess is 3.5 though. All right. So one thing that if you've used ChatGPT enough, you know that it will hallucinate at some point or another. A very common classic hallucination, too, that I always like to point to is that if you ask how many states have one syllable or just one syllable, it seems to mess up that one a lot. It always thinks Texas is like a one syllable state. Another one that I like to use is, what United States presidents were born in New York. For some reason, he has trouble with this one. Maybe it's related to kind of this listicle format, or that I don't know. There's a lot of different, that's the kind of nature of having these things being black boxes. Like you don't always know. So what we're going to do, we are going to run a batch test here, and we're going to just change around a bunch of the models to see what the outputs look like. Do GPT-4. Run that. So the correct answer is there are 5. I believe it's Martin Van Buren, Millard Fillmore, Roosevelt, both Roosevelts, and Donald Trump. So we'll see how the different models handle this one. All right, that was fast. Feels like the models are getting faster every day. All right, so let's see. OpenAI says 3.5. We got, looks like we missed out on Donald Trump here, who was born in Queens. And this is, yeah, temperature set to 0.5. There's nothing too crazy here. Yeah, this is all pretty normal stuff, normal parameters. Claude, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's good. That's a little summary at the end, so check mark for Claude. The instruct model goes crazy for some reason. It starts naming, geez, we got 10, 11 listed here, so that's not good. GPT-4 gets it right. This is 3.5, just hosted on Azure, gets it wrong. Looks like it's missing FDR. And so this is a good example of just what seems like a very basic question isn't always going to get you an easy answer. And so it is a reminder to, you really need to test these things. We were only right on what, 2 of them, 2 out of 5. So that's like if you're doing evaluations, the 40% correct rate. So we'd obviously need to do some beefing up to this prompt. So it's important to do that. It's important to always audit the information you're getting back. Let's try and just do one thing. Maybe say, we'll go into a lot more of kind of different prompting methods and how we could make this prompt better tomorrow. But we have a couple extra minutes here, so I'll do the same test with a slightly different prompt, and we'll just see how the models perform. All right, let's see if that did anything different. Yeah, this has happened before. So if we look at this one, it names a couple born in New York, and then it names Chester Arthur, who's born in Fairfield, Vermont, but grew up in New York. And so this is obviously wrong, but it gives us a good hint into the kind of underlying thinking of the models maybe conflating born in New York versus spent time in New York. And so we could then use that to adjust the prompt to maybe be more explicit about born in New York, not just raised or spent time here. And so we can adjust for that. So it's kind of adjusting for that edge case. Anthropic, let's see, 1, 2, 3. So here we have a case where it's missing one now. This one just, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, missing Donald Trump. I mean, the Donald Trump one, could be a recency issue, but I don't really think so. Oh my God, does this one reach? It makes a list of all the US presidents, research the birthplace, and then identifies the New York one. And again, we see it's saying Chester Arthur is a New Yorker, even though he's born in Vermont, just because he spent a lot of time here. And so I think if we accommodated for that kind of edge case of people who weren't born in New York, but spent time here, we could get this prompt working a lot better and give it up to kind of a higher evaluation truth rate. And so that's just a good example of what you can find from just some very quick testing and the kind of importance and value that you can get from that. And yeah, that kind of wraps up where we are for today. I'll stop sharing my screen here. And so, let's see. Thanks to everyone who answered the poll, by the way. If there's any other questions, like I said, we're ending in 2 minutes here. I'm happy to hang on for a little. If anyone has any more specific questions or prompt-related questions, you can let me know. And we'll hang around a couple of minutes here. If not, tomorrow we'll be diving into a kind of a lot more hands-on stuff. We'll be looking at a bunch of the different types of prompt engineering methods that we've written about on our blog and when those are useful. And we'll go ahead and we'll build a little AI app through PromptHub as well. And something that is hopefully recreatable and something you can take home to kind of use in your daily life too. And so if I don't see anyone, let's see, when do we get access to PromptHub to try it ourselves? So let's see, I sent the access code. Yeah. And so Dalton sending me the access code. Dalton, can you just send just off the link to the registration? I don't know if I mentioned beginning, but Dalton is our co-founder here at PromptHub. So he's helping out in the chat. So thank you, Dalton, for all of that. Any advice for minimizing testing costs? Hold on 1 second. I see a question from Branko about the recording being available later. Yes. Sharing recordings. And so in terms of minimizing testing costs, it's hard to, the answer is you have to do it until you kind of have a good feeling for it, until it's working pretty well, until it's passing whatever, benchmarks that you've set. And that could be long, that could be short. You could spend time researching and learning about different methods that you could implement, versus just getting your hands dirty and trying it out. And so maybe the methods can kind of skip a bunch of steps for you. You could try using a cheaper model to start for testing until you have it just kind of in generally the outputs are in the shape and looking how you want. I'd recommend starting with whatever model you think you'll be using, though. So I think putting time in the beginning and just getting, immersing yourself in the educational aspect of prompt engineering and learning as much as you can will really help guide you. And then getting started and just getting your hands dirty with it will allow you to learn pretty quickly. In the example we saw, I ran 10 prompts which probably just be like maybe a cent. And we found a pretty good edge case to cover for those presidents that were born in other states who spent time in New York. And so, you want to try to learn as much as you can, and that really requires getting your hands dirty. I don't have a ton of great advice for minimizing costs. Other than, you could try using cheaper models to start. Let's see. Can we build a custom GPT through prompt engineering? Definitely. How effective a custom GPT works is a product of a few things. The system message being one of them. The knowledge and the tools that you set up as well, whatever files you upload are part of the equation too, but certainly one of the big aspects of the custom GPT is that system message that you send along. And so you can use prompt engineering to help with that whole process. And you want to make it secure as well, and that's a good place to include security information when you're building your custom GPTs. And so I would definitely recommend the best GPTs will have good prompt engineering to some degree. Let's see. Const, I see you're saying PromptHub says your API key is incorrect. Yeah, I would double check. We're just, when you input your API key, we just check that it exists and that it's like up and running. That check happens by OpenAI. So I would like double check that. If not, if you could send me or Dalton, the panelist, the error message you're getting, I could try and troubleshoot that for you while we're here. Block, I see any local open source model recommendations for heavier testing. GPT for all is like a very good open source model. So, and I know the founder well there, and I would say I'd recommend those. I'm less knowledgeable on the open source front, to be 100% honest with you. We've done some testing and whatnot. Any of the llamas, depending on your use case, or falcons are good too. The thing with using a different model for heavier testing is that if you're going to switch out to a different model, that will kind of change a lot, because these things are kind of a black box. We don't really know what's different about one versus the other. And so moving from one model, doing all your testing with one model, and then switching to another, some of the stuff might not directly translate. Some of the best practices will, but maybe not everything. All right. I think that's really about it. Conti, see your message. See. Yeah, I would just double check the API key. I would try generating a new one. Like I said, that comes directly from OpenAI. And so we are only checking that it exists. So I would just create a new one and check that out. And if you're still having issues, drop me an email or reach out on Intercom once we jump here, and I'll be able to help you more. I mean, Dalton and I can help you more directly. Yeah, I think that's really about it. In terms of how much PromptHub will cost, we'll be rolling out plans in the next month or so. You'll get a big heads up about it. And we'll let everybody know. You'll get a discount for being early too. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. We'll see you same time tomorrow. Really looking forward to tomorrow. We'll be getting to some more kind of advanced stuff, and should be a lot of fun, but we will see everyone then.